I'm joined now by someone who started off in the world of visual effects during the mid-70s, but more recently has worked a lot in terms of comedy and both sitcoms on shows such as Not Going Out, Still Open All Hours, and also had a long association with Jonathan Creek. So I'd like to introduce visual and special effects designer Chris Lawson. How are you?
Hello there, it's fine, thank you very much. Yeah.
And you managing to keep yourself busy during these sort of rather odd times?
Um, all sorts of jobs have been going on. It seems to be, I thought, well, like, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And sometimes I get very, oh, I can't be bothered. And then you have to make yourself get down. And suddenly you find the whole day's gone. So, yeah, it's not very good this time, these days.
Yeah. Yes, I know the feeling. It's too easy sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, what does a visual effects designer do? You know, that's quite a broad title.
Well, it covers all aspects, really. I would say, I mean, obviously you had to read the scripts and go to planning meetings and then talk to the producer and the director that they wanted a specific effect or whether they didn't know how they were going to achieve it. And generally, special effects started to become, oh, well, we don't know what to do, give it to special effects or visual effects to sort out. So basically, that was basically, and costing it, all that sort of thing, to achieve the end result, basically. And that was it.
And am I right in thinking you'd have joined the BBC sort of the mid-70s, which must have been an interesting time to work in television, let alone visual effects?
Yeah, actually, it was earlier in the 70s that I joined, but I hadn't got the art degrees and things like that. So I joined as a storeman, actual fact, in the visual effects department at Brentford. So that meant that I had to sort of supply the blokes with all the materials that they needed, go out buying stuff for them. And it gave me the opportunity. So in the evenings, sometimes because in those days we used to record in the evenings, I used to go in and help the boys in the studios for nothing, just to earn a little bit of knowledge how it was all done.
So that must have been a great way to not only understand the ins and outs of the departments, but get to know everybody because you're not just working with one person.
Oh, that's right, yes. Anybody. I mean, I used to work with everybody, so you knew the whole department very quickly. And then also you learned other departments, and everybody used to work together. I mean, like with makeup and design department and us and cameras and sound, we all used to work together, basically.
So what would have been one of your early jobs? Would it have been something like Doctor Who?
Well, actually, working as an assistant, actually, no, it wasn't. Well, I did do some evenings on Doctor Who. I remember it was John Pertwee was the doctor, and I did a few of those with designers. John Ward, yes, John Ward, I think it was. I can't remember the other people, but I did a few Doctor Who's, but they were only sort of freebies I used to do in the evenings. But the actual first real job that I did as an assistant was working on Dad's Army, doing things on that. And then after that, then you had to, when you became a full assistant, which I was then you had to do your turn at Doctor Who, doing things with Peter Day, who was a Doctor Who designer, was a designer. I can't remember, Jim Ward, that was it. Tony Oxley. Well, there are a lot of people in the old days that used to work for them.
Because I imagine everybody would have to have a very broad skill set, or would some people specialise, I don't know, more in model making as opposed to pyrotechnics?
Well, yeah, everybody had to have a complete cross section of the, and we were all taught different things. Pyrotechnics, especially, came under a sort of a big wing but people specialised as well. So there were people. A person called Dave Havard used to be very much into the pyrotechnics with my boss, with Michael John Harris. They used to look after the pyrotechnics, but then other people used to specialise in sculpture. Other people, I enjoyed mechanical stuff, basically. So, but I used to do everything as well. Well, learn everything. Try to learn everything. It's supposed to be a master of everything, but I mean, he's to try and do everything, but a master of nothing.
So something like Doctor Who must have been a great training ground, because it's, I suppose, one of the few shows at the time that not only had model shots, pyrotechnics, it must have had a bit of everything from your point of view.
Yes, totally. And it was one of the jobs that you went on to right at the beginning, and you worked on it right the way through to the final bits on it. Other times, a lot of programs you just went in and did a couple of bits on odd programs. But Doctor Who, it was all the way through. And as you say, totally wide, the variety of different jobs that we had to do it: model making, pyrotechnics, obviously, space models and filming techniques. And in those days, model shooting was sort of developing. So in the years that we were doing it, I mean, we brought it right the way through to really quite good models, other than things hanging on bits of plastic wire and being flown through shot at high speed. But yes, it was quite a varied job.
And of course, this would have been early days for CSO and video effects. So
That's right.
there must have been quite an overlap between yourselves and them then.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. What were they called? I can't remember. I can't remember what the department was called, but they were very clever, and they used, of course, with CSO, the blue, and you used to hang that up, and then we'll just make this go there, and we'll do this and do that and do that. And you say, right, okay, great. If you could do that, that'd be lovely. But people walking in front of blue, and all the problems with fringing in the early days because of hair and whatever. But it was a great asset, yes. And then we started developing against black as well for film techniques, and then with cameras moving and keeping everything fixed off and moving around an object. But it was progressing very, very quickly. And of course now you can see what those early days, and now you can see fantastic effects everywhere, you know, so on film and stuff.
There must have been some directors that understood it a little bit better, or I imagine pushed and asked for more. Were there any that particularly stood out?
I can remember. I can't remember their names, but there were a couple. There were a few that were quite into it, and there were others who say, "Right, well, that's down to you now. You sort it out. We'll have a look at the finished product."
Because someone like Michael E. Bryan, I always remember in Robots of Death, there's a wonderful model shot that he puts in the actual set of the bridge onto that model shot, which must have been fairly early on for that sort of thing.
Yes, well, that was Richard Conway, who was the designer on that, with the model with the land miners, whatever going from. And I learned a terrific amount from Richard. I built the model of the land thing. Richard put in the rotating augers in the thing of it. But we did sort of did shots where looking into the thing and then superimposing it into the studio. And then all the model shots as such, we did it in our own model shot studio, and like making new scenes, scenes, I suppose, very, very quickly with sand, moving it all over the place, colouring it with paints and things like that, and paint dusts, and pulling the thing through and blowing air and all sorts of things. And it worked very, very well. But that's sort of Richard Conway had been doing things like XL5 in the old days, and was a great model person, you know, doing models and things. But we had a great time with that. It was most enjoyable. I learned an awful lot.
And in terms of models, I suppose, and Doctor Who, State of Decay must have been a very busy one, because not only did you have the tower, which turned out to be a rocket, but you had the surrounding landscape. It must be wonderful to sort of lose yourself in that detail at times.
Well, I have to say, it's one of the ones I can't remember an awful lot about. But yes, well, making the models, I mean, it could be done very quick. But the actual main models had to be done properly. But then the backgrounds could be moved around very quickly to give yourself different angles and whatever. But I have to say, that's not one of the ones that I really remember too much about. Maybe I didn't do it.
But one you did mention before we started recording was image of the Fendal, in which you actually
Yeah,
found yourself on screen. Was that a
yeah,
common occurrence?
quite often, yes. You often had to do things yourself and do it. But as the Fendal, basically, I was inside it, so hardly on screen. I was probably the main sort of heart of the thing inside and moving the odd bits and pieces. But yeah, that was they actually. There's one particular thing with that was on one occasion we were recording and it was sort of coming up to supper time because we used to record all day and then in the evening or whatever like that. And I was in the Fendal, and then between takes they used to hang me up by a scene hoist just to take the weight off the thing off with that. And anyway, they all crept off and left me in the studio. And they all came back. And I was in the studio, because everybody's gone from the studio, and I was thinking, buggers, they've all left me. They came back in a couple of minutes. But yeah, that was inside the thing. And then also we made the baby Fendals as well, which were all made for, and then had wire controls to make them move. You have to remember, we didn't have an awful lot of money in those days to make things. Everything was done, bits of string and whatever we could lay our hands on.
So how easy was that main costume to operate then? Because, of course, you've not got hands and legs, but as you say, it must have been heavy and visibility.
It was heavy, yeah. It went onto my shoulders, the weight of it, and basically all I had to do was sort of contort and move a bit and shake forward and backwards and whatever. Luckily I didn't have any lines because I couldn't.
So would you have had to go into rehearsals as the Fendal, or were you still busy building the costume at that point?
They just had, imagine it's here. I didn't have to go. No, I didn't. No. But it was generally, it didn't really move an awful lot. It was just basically sat in the corner or whatever, or moving around. Basically, it was like a snake.
And I always remember there's a fantastic sequence of a glowing skull that is then superimposed with Wanda Bentham.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Doctor Who must have some of the most unusual prop requests, surely.
All the time, yes. A lot of the time you're thinking, how are we going to do this now? Because if Wanda Bentham as well, we had to do her elevating as well. So she had to be laying down and then, as if by magic, upright, So we had an enormous rig built into a stage, which we'd built, but with a counterbalance in it, so that it was operated around her heels, which just lifted her up into the air. Yes, because she was Wanda Bentham, that's right, yeah. I'm trying to think what else happened on the show, but long time ago.
So having worked fairly extensively as an assistant on Doctor Who, how was it, the thought of actually being the designer during Peter Davison's time? Was it quite exciting?
It was exciting, yes, definitely, but very worrying. It always looks a lovely job to be doing, but you had to make sure everything was safe, everything worked. You didn't have the time. Everything had to be done straight away and do it right, bless you, first time. They hadn't got time to muck around. So it was worrying a lot of the time, a lot of stress related to that program. It was Peter Davison, that's right. Yeah. But we went to, on that, Peter Davison. Actually, it was the last one, I think, with Peter Davison. We went out to Lanzarote. And that was one I was quite pleased with. We were working on this volcanic area in Lanzarote, which is a national treasure there. And they had to have a shot with, I can't remember who it was, the actress, the assistant, can't remember, running towards a spaceship that had crashed. And I remember that they all saying, and they said, oh no one, only one person is allowed to go onto the ground, the moonscape. This is the people in charge of Lanzarote. And that was all you could do, So they said, well, there's no way that they were going to be able to build a set of a space, So I'd said to the director and to the producer and the cameraman, I said, well, I could do a foreground miniature, which we could set up and have her running across the ground, give her a false eye line, and then she'd be pointing out or doing something or other, and you should be able to get the shot that way. Anyway, the rest of the whole world, they're going on to, oh, this won't work. No way this can work. No way this can work. We won't bother doing it. So towards the end of the day, the producer came up to me, and I'm trying to think which one it was. He said, Chris, do you think this will work, really? So I said, yes, I think so. It's worthwhile having a look. So I set it all up during the day, with the model shot. And with a foreground miniature, basically what you do is you put the model quite close to the camera, and the rest of it is going on in the background, but it makes it look on a long lens that you are shooting the whole scene, basically. So I set it up using an ordinary 35mm camera on a tripod. Like that. Anyway, they came down, the cameraman said, it's not going to work, we're just wasting our time. And anyway, the cameraman looks through the 35mm camera lens, and I put what the name was out in the thing. And he went, oh, bring the camera over here. So he brought the proper camera over, and he said, all right, that's good, isn't it? And we'll do this, we'll do that, fantastic. Oh, we could do this, we could do that. And the cameraman actually said to me, he said, well, quite honestly, Chris, if you say something's going to work in future, I'll believe you. So I was quite proud of that one, and that saved them an awful lot of getting problems on getting that scene.
And of course, working abroad, Lanzarote is, you're not going to be able to pop back to the BBC if you've missed something. That must, a whole different way of working, that you've got to do everything has got to be planned and spares, whatever have you. Was it quite nice, though, to be away from London for a bit?
Well, it's nice to get away from London, yes. But as you say, when you go abroad, you definitely cut your links with whatever. And because you've got different languages to worry about, and you've got to make sure that you've got everything there. And if you haven't, you've got to think, crikey, what can I do here? Can I do this? Or can I make that? What have I got in there? And then you haven't got all the proper tools that you'd normally have with you, because it's all got to fly there. And I remember I actually took out, went to Gatwick Airport with the TARDIS, and took the TARDIS out to Lanzarote. I always remember that one. So that we could do the rollback and mix of the TARDIS arriving. We had I don't know whether you should say that we had a strange happening with that, with the actual TARDIS on the beach. And what was happening in the background, a girl was falling in the water, and there was someone was trying to save her. I can't remember the actual story, but something was going on, and she was screaming in the water, and the TARDIS then arrives on the beach at the front. So what we did in those days was we put the TARDIS in, filmed a bit of it, very carefully lifted it up, and without causing too many footprints or whatever like that, lifted it up and then recorded again. So then and the same sequence is going on in the background. So then you put the two together, and that's called a rollback and mix, which shows the TARDIS with the noise going on, arriving. But the funny thing was that this beach that we were on happened to be a nudist beach as well. And we just lifted the TARDIS out of the way, and it started the camera again. And anyway, this irate German decided to come running up to us like that, start naked, up towards the camera. And so the assistant said, well, the cameraman said, keep it running, we'll send this back to Ealing. Anyway, he was cross because he thought it was a real problem going out in the sea, and we shouldn't have done it. We should have let everyone know that it was only play acting. I always remember that bit.
Because of course, over here, Doctor Who, even then, was a well-known and well-loved show. Was there that level of interest both in Lanzarote and Amsterdam as well?
Yes, I mean, Amsterdam, I was only out there for a short period of time, just doing some smoking things on the person's body. That was all it was. But on that, you would never hear of it today. I had a hire car, I think it was, and I was parked up in Schiphol Airdrome, the car park in Schiphol, swapping explosives with this Dutch special effects bloke. You can't see that happening these days.
No, you certainly wouldn't get away with it today.
Yeah.
But closer to home, your sort of final encounter with Doctor Who was Attack of the Cybermen, which with, as you imagine, with Cybermen, lots of gunshots, pyrotechnics. Was that a particularly busy story for you?
Oh yes, on those sort of things we always used to do. Well, we were always trying to push it a little bit more, get a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so the stuntmen, we were asking the stuntmen to do more and more difficult poses or different shapes with their bodies, so that we used to make false arms and plates over their arms and then blow their arm off with loads of wire hanging out. And then once we did blowing their head off, so we had them with a thing on their top of their shoulders, up on top of his head, with a false head on top of it, like this. And poor stuntman is trying to make it believe that he's, but it all worked very well in the end. Little quick shots, and there was the Cyberman being shot and blowing his head off.
And that was a story that had a lot both on location and in studio. Do you have, I imagine you have greater control of the environment, of course, in studio. Does that mean that your setups can be perhaps bigger and more ambitious in the confines of a studio?
Well, you're restricted because you're in a studio. So with the pyrotechnics and things, you are certainly restricted to a certain amount. You can't do great big massive smoke explosions and things like that in the studio, because you have to get rid of all that for the next scene. So people don't like all the smoke hanging around, and then also things are a lot tighter, so you can't get people away from pyrotechnics and things. Whereas when you're in the open on location, you can force them away and do much more visual explosions and stuff like that. So everything like consoles blowing up, where just basically sparks going off and small little pyrotechnics.
And from there, am I right in thinking you went on to the first series of Blackadder?
I did Blackadder. Did the first series, the first one of Blackadder. I only did the first one. I was doing several other things, so I did that Blackadder, which was I don't think it was the best received Blackadder, really, because I think it went on to the studio stuff afterwards. And they changed a lot of things, because the first one was basically the writers and the producer sort of trying to work out how it's going to look. But then the money, I think, was restricting them for the second one. So that meant it all went into the studio.
So how different are comedies or sitcoms to work on? Because I imagine perhaps some of the requests are a little bit more straightforward.
Comedies, I enjoy comedy stuff, and there's quite a lot of work on a comedy in all sorts of different ways. Some subtle things that you don't even think are an effect happen, which is the best thing possible. If they happen without you noticing that it's an effect, then that's great. But I've done an awful lot of comedy in my time. Also, Blackadder, Last of the Summer Wine. Lots of them. I can't think who they are at the moment.
Because it's something like a sketch show, such as Alexi Sale's stuff, that must be a great range of requests, because each scene is a different setup entirely.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. So when you're doing other big dramas or whatever like that, it's just one bit. Every sketch or whatever they do has a new probably effect or something inside it, But I did Blackadder, and then because of doing Blackadder, I went on to do not 9 o'clock news, because the producer wanted me to go onto that, which was, that was an awful lot of work, because you used to pray that no disaster or some story would break in the newspapers or whatever at the weekend, because you knew you'd be working all night to try and make some stupid gag out of it. But that was great fun, and I loved it. That was John Lloyd again, as well as on Blackadder. So he was the producer on there.
So that must have been the joy that you could do, Doctor Who, comedies, sitcoms, but also things like Ivanhoe that, obviously was, big scale production, but,
yes.
A straight drama.
Yes. There was a lot on Ivanhoe. Gosh, I've forgotten about that one. Ivanhoe was a lot of props, fire, fighting, all sorts of things. And I can't remember what. I don't know. Do you know, I've forgotten all that about that.
A lot of it was done on location. You know, it was sort of it was sort of knights in armor. You know, it was a period piece.
Yeah, it was all on most of it all on location, except for the end when we went to Pinewood Film Studios, but inside of the castle. Yes, because that was quite good, because we had to do the castle on fire in the studios in Pinewood, which those days letting us do that was quite an amazing thing. You know, we had about 4 stories of castle, and the director wanted all this stuff falling through shot on fire and beams crashing down and flames everywhere and people running everywhere. But good fun.
And you had a long association with Jonathan Creek, which
Yes.
is a show that I wouldn't immediately say was special effects heavy, but clearly was. How did you first come to be involved with this?
With Jonathan Creek? Well, I worked with Susie Belbin quite a lot on One Foot in the Grave. So I did a lot of, well, all of those, One Foot in the Grave. And as I say, Susie Belbin was the director producer of that. And then she was producer of Jonathan Creek. So she got me on to do that. But there was quite a lot of stuff, because a lot of the tricks and things we had to make, and the different things that he got up to, as well as the ambience like rain and making everything look ridiculously silly. But there was quite a lot of work on that, and a lot of because David Brennick, the writer, is very, very meticulous about how things should look, because he has it in his head that what it's important that when this happens, and you won't refer back to it right until the end, and then suddenly you realise why that has got to do this and whatever that. So we used to make an awful lot of things, you know, like collapsing samurais, and there was tricks with things on fire, cages that people hung up in, that the ropes are on fire, and rain coming down, and the fire system going off, all sorts of different things. A complete range of effects work, very, very busy. Oh, yeah.
So was that perhaps one of the most enjoyable shows to do?
Again, stressful, I think it's more. Yes, they were all enjoyable in the end. Afterwards, they're always enjoyable. But while you're doing them, quite stressful.
Jonathan Creek was a time when I assume you'd gone freelance by that point, and the way in which television was made was really starting to change, particularly in terms of the BBC.
Yes. Well, yes, because, yes, there were 2 or 3 of us set up together, all individuals, but used to work for each other. So there was a certain amount more freedom, because you didn't come under the realm of the BBC. But when you got onto location and things, then you came back under the bracket of the house, the in-house rules and regulations. It made life a bit easier, I think, a bit more enjoyable sometimes. But again, the same thing applied. You had to go and read the scripts, to go into meetings, go and talk to people, be on the phone, sorting out problems with the designers and whatever. So it was a similar setup, except that you didn't have to be going up to Television Centre or wherever first thing in the morning every day, which made life a lot easier.
And as the demand, or I suppose ambition, of television increased these days with the addition of things like CGI, and of course everything's now done in HD, or is it perhaps the same tricks but shot differently?
There's a lot of electronic stuff, obviously, now, which has taken away a lot of our work. But we still do. Actors still want something tangible to work around, so they find it very difficult when they're working on the blue screen, green screen, or against the black or something or other. Actors generally say that they prefer to have something that they can react to, rather than just working on eye lines, basically. But still, we still make up. I mean, I've been doing recently, Still Open All Hours with David Jason up there. And he always likes to have something, he's very particular about what he wants to see there. So we make things for that. So that's quite busy, and props and bicycles that do silly things and whatever, cars that do things, whatever.
Because I suppose it must be quite nice to reinvent an existing classic series, but sort of bring it up to date.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yes, yes. Well, that all comes in the dialogue, really, I suppose, bringing it up to modern. But it's still very similar to the old relationship between the grocer and the boy or whatever. But great fun. I mean, we did a lot more with the till because, I don't know if you've seen the program that the till does all sorts of things. So I've made the till, rather than just snapping shut, which is what it used to do in the old days, it opens in a strange way, or it closes, or then it hesitates. So it does all sorts of different things now, rather than just slamming shut in these fingers. Then that's another thing, we have to watch out if we don't slam it in David's fingers.
Well, I think on the joys of reinventing a classic series, I think that's a lovely note to end on. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Chris.
Okay, well, I hope I managed to get something for you to show anyway.